Today, CMC presents Conversations 2018, sponsored by Hollywood Casino, Elmer Byrne, Puffin Foundation West, Columbus Partnership, Dispatch Media Group, and the Hilton Columbus Downtown. Each of our sponsors are represented here by many friends and associates. Please help me thank them all. Now, please welcome Alex Fisher, President and CEO of the Columbus Partnership, to introduce our speakers. Alex.
Great. Thank you, Carol, and to all the leadership of the CMC. This is a special environment that is so part of the Columbus way. The world is changing really, really quickly. Mark Kwame saw me in the lobby. He said, "You'll never believe how I got here today." And I said, "I have no idea, but I came on a bird." And Mark said, "So did I," and it was totally unscripted. 200 birds were dropped into Columbus. They're electric scooters. You can use your iPhone. We're hoping our 2 birds are still going to allow us to travel back down the side of a mile. It is an example, as is next week the Hyperloop, in a very different way, that the world is changing and Columbus is the kind of place that wants to be on the forefront. It's the reason why today is a great place for the conversation among these 2 great leaders. This is an example of what the Harvard Business School talks about when it teaches mayors around the world about the Columbus way. A culture of curiosity that is part of our winning formula. The practice of real collaboration that produces results without any regard to the political aisles. An attitude of civility that permeates how we treat each other as humans, not as competitors. Above all else, a culture that is compassionate for each other and demands accountability for the greater good. So in introducing our guest, I could tell you about Jobs Ohio. I could tell you about Medicaid expansion, the Transportation Research Center's announcement this week to become the world's largest autonomy testing facility. I could tell you about the fiscal strength of Ohio. But instead, let me tell you about John Kasich that I've watched over the last 8 years. He's been an essential part of our efforts, and he has been living and practicing and perfecting curiosity, collaboration, and civility, not only over the last 8 years, but for his entire lifetime. Curiosity is the courage to admit that you don't know what you don't know, to be willing to change your mind, to innovate, to become better. I've watched firsthand John Kasich change his mind on issues, to watch, to learn, to evolve, to discuss, and most importantly, to innovate in government, a hallmark of any great leader. True collaboration, a hallmark of the partnership, doesn't have political boundaries or political motives. This politically elected governor has always asked, what do we need to do together? I've never once seen him take the approach of political gamesmanship of party. In recent years, I know that we all struggle with this greater sense of civility. That is why we at the partnership are driving the civility conversations throughout the community. Is there any question in anybody's mind in this room that our friend John has made us extremely proud in how he brought an unwavering commitment to civility, representing all of us, Democrats, Independents, Republicans, with distinction on a very important national stage. And on the topic of compassion, I've watched this very important man here in Ohio and around the country stop in his tracks, walk up to everyday, ordinary individuals, strangers in need, give them a hug, give them attention. I've watched him call friends in need with an important phone call, and I've also watched him here in Ohio with some of the largest policy decisions, all rooted in putting his neighbor first. Finally, John also isn't afraid to remind us that we're all accountable to a greater good, and that's something I personally, and I think the entire room, could need and share a whole lot more of publicly. Bret Stephens is going to lead today's conversation. A discussion with the governor. Nobody better to have in our community to think about civility and collaboration with this great American politician business leader and leader in our community. Bret joined the New York Times as an op-ed columnist in 2017. Many of us know him after a long career with the Wall Street Journal, where he most recently was the deputy editorial page, and for 11 years, foreign affairs columnist. He's received numerous awards and distinctions, won the 2013 Pulitzer Prize for commentary. He's reported and interviewed scores of national and international political leaders. Bret, it is wonderful to have you back in Columbus. He was last here 16 years ago, and we were talking about the changes in our city. And without further ado, let me turn it over to Bret, who will make a few introductory comments and then have a conversation with the governor.
Well, Alex, thank you for the very generous introduction, and it really is a pleasure to be back here in Columbus. The city is a much bigger, more beautiful place than what I remember from almost 2 decades ago. I'm going to offer some preliminary remarks about the state of the conservative movement, and then we're going to move to the conversation with the governor, and I trust that you'll find parts of what I say to agree with, parts of what I say to disagree with, and hopefully all of it to provoke you. So I came of age in the 1980s when conservatives believed a number of things. They believed the Cold War could be won. They believed that immigration was good. They believed that protectionism was bad. They believed that the truth was not relative and that character mattered and that there was such a thing as a free world worth championing. And by the end of that decade, with the Berlin Wall down and the U.S. economy roaring, it was easy to see why conservatives could claim vindication. It is what attracted me as a politically minded teenager to their banner. Today, my 3 children are of the age that I was in the 1980s. What is conservatism to them? Here's what. A compulsively dishonest president with an instinct for publicly bullying and belittling others. A slogan, America First, which is taken directly from the isolationist movement that predated U.S. entry into World War II. Rallies in which the president enjoins his supporters to rage against the news media as an enemy of the American people. Trade wars, border walls, and the separation of migrant parents from their children. This is an abbreviated list, but it's enough to ensure that my kids will not, at least not soon, become conservatives, at least politically speaking, and I don't exactly fault them. But it's also a shame and maybe a tragedy because no democracy can remain healthy for long without a morally sound and intellectually serious conservative movement. Right now, I'm not entirely sure the United States has one. Recent elections in Italy and other European countries are a reminder that Western democracies around the world are at risk. In place of a politics in which the fringes bend toward the center, we have a politics in which the center increasingly bends toward the fringe. And that is how democracies perish. What then should conservatism be about? By definition, conservatism is the politics of order, tradition, restraint, and prudence. But conservatism in a liberal society, a liberal regime such as ours in the United States, will always mean something different, since the foundational order that conservatives mean to conserve is itself not conservative. The thoughtful conservative addresses this paradox by advocating a politics of liberal ends and conservative means. The ends are the rights of the individual to enjoy the greatest degree of personal liberty compatible with the rights of his or her neighbor. The means are the institutions, family, church, schools and universities, the military, civic associations, businesses, the free market itself, and so on. that help produce citizens who are capable of responsible and enlightened self-government. To argue for conservatism for conservatism's own sake is folly. Its purpose is to give men and women the moral and intellectual wherewithal to take full advantage of their birthright as free people. This is also to say that intelligent conservatives appreciate, sometimes better than their left-wing peers do, the fragility of the liberal order. Liberal democracies do not spring spontaneously into being, a lesson the United States has learned painfully in places like Afghanistan and Iraq. They are far more vulnerable to neglect, decay, subversion, or overthrow than many of us would care to believe. Just look at the decay of liberal democracy in European countries such as Hungary or Poland. Free societies have enemies: the forces of revolution and reaction, of left-wing and right-wing populism, of utopia and tribe. The core conservative task is to protect liberalism from those enemies, even if it sometimes means protecting liberals from themselves. In the 1970s and 80s, it was not hard to know who the enemy was, what he did, or the things for which he stood. You simply needed to read people like Alexander Solzhenitsyn or follow the news from Poland. In the 1990s, it was not hard to know, as political correctness and identity politics came into vogue, that liberalism could not thrive if speech was not truly free, and if the ties of common citizenship took second place to racial, ethnic, or other forms of affinity. After the attacks of September 11, 2001, the enemy was also clear, not just in the form of Osama bin Laden and other terrorists, but also in the broader Islamist movement from which al-Qaeda had emerged. These enemies came either from the left or at least from the outside. What about the enemies on the right, especially the domestic ones? For many years, I was convinced that the mainstream conservative movement had purged most of the bigots in its midst. Starting in the 1950s, William F. Buckley, the godfather of the modern American conservative movement, forbade anti-Semites from the pages of his magazine, National Review. In due course, the same thing was done to segregationists, conspiracy theory kooks, and so on. And by the time I began working for the conservative editorial page of the Wall Street Journal in the 1990s, I was sure this process was complete. I think I was mistaken. Advocates of the closed society have made a roaring comeback by cleverly seizing on public discontents over trade and, in particular, immigration from Latin America. From those positions, it is a short hop to denunciations of globalism and the deep state, the sinister conspiracies of within and without that now routinely issue from the White House. Here again, it should have been the task of leading conservative thinkers to point out the foulness and danger of this and denounce it. But after capturing the Republican nomination and then the presidency, Trump also captured most of the conservative intelligentsia. Suddenly, the same columnists who had spent 20 or 30 years of their careers writing earnest denunciations of the moral degradation of liberalism or progressivism or the left found complete comfort with a president who consorts with porn stars. These same conservatives had, until just a few years ago, denounced the Obama administration for its softness on the Putin regime in Russia. And yet, by the time President Trump was in the Oval Office, they were arguing for pragmatism with a Russian dictator. The capitulation of so many conservative figures to Trumpism is, to my mind, probably the most dangerous aspect of this presidency. It means that the liberal order, already under siege from the new champions of illiberalism, has lost a vital element of its defense and perpetuation. Who will make the case for free speech when it is under attack by Islamists, Putinists, Trumpists, as well as an increasingly vocal corner of the left that champions speech codes on college and corporate campuses? Who will stand up for the free market if it too is under siege from the Steve Bannon protectionists on the right and the Bernie Sanders socialists on the left? Who still believes in the idea of a free world bound above all by a shared commitment to liberal ideals that should unite democracies the world over against their dictatorial foes? In the United States, the handful of conservative thinkers who make the case for this sort of liberalism are called never-Trumpers. This name is something of a misnomer. There are never-Trumpers who have, for all intents and purposes, become liberals. There are never-Trumpers like me who have publicly defended some of the president's policies when we happen to agree with him. As, for instance, I agree that Bret Kavanaugh will make an excellent Supreme Court justice. Be that as it may, it is my view that those conservatives who understand the fundamental difference between conservatism, as I've just defined it, and Trumpism, those conservatives have never been more important than now. Conservatism in the tradition of the free market economist Friedrich Hayek, the political philosopher Michael Oakeshott, or public intellectuals like the late Bill Buckley, this conservatism is a vital ingredient in the preservation of a free society. The conservative temperament is, at its occasional best, about refusing to be swept along in the current of things. Now is the time, as Buckley famously wrote in 1955, to stand athwart history yelling, "Stop." Can that be done? Right now, the so-called never-Trumpers have lost not only a political party, but also an institutional base in the form of a major newspaper or a prominent think tank. It might recover these if the Trump presidency fails in some spectacular way, economic crisis, removal from office, or a calamitous war, but it is neither right nor smart to bet on such things. One should assume that Trumpism will succeed politically, just as Orbanism and Erdoganism have succeeded. The road back to recovery is likely to be a long one. What thoughtful conservatives can do now is reassert the political and moral principles for which we must stand. The principles of 1776 and 1989, of Adam Smith from The Wealth of Nations and Thomas Jefferson from the Declaration of Independence, of Václav Havel of the Czech Republic, and Tiananmen Square's anonymous heroic tank man. Those principles of free markets over the confiscatory state, of the pursuit of individual happiness over the claims of communal tradition, of independent thinking over the enforced conformity of ideology, and of conscience and courage in the face of the mechanical power of tyrannical regimes are why, even now, we live in a free and prosperous world. Students of American history are familiar with the story of Benjamin Franklin's reply at the close of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787 to a woman who asked him, "Well, doctor, what have we got, a republic or a monarchy?" To which Franklin immortally replied, "A republic if you can keep it." The task of the true conservative today is to keep it. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to welcome the governor to the stage. That's good. Well, it's nice to see you, Governor.
Thank you. I've been a fan of Bret's for a long time. We used to visit the Wall Street Journal editorial board on occasion. He was there. And then I was reading the New York Times one day, and I thought, boy, isn't this interesting? A guy with the same name as my friend at the Wall Street Journal. And then I called him. And isn't it great that they have a gathering like this here to hear this? I hope you listened carefully to what he said. And if you just were to just delete some of the kind of observations about the president that kind of gets close to something I've tried to avoid. The message here is really serious. And you know, a lot of people in Central Ohio, particularly in the media around Ohio, they want to know, Bret, why the heck I'm on television all the time? Well, I think you just answered it, didn't you? Somebody has to speak about these things. Somebody has to talk about this. And for whatever reason, the good Lord and the people of this state gave me an opportunity to have a platform. I'm headed tonight to speak at the National Press Club tomorrow about the future of the United States-European alliance. It's critical. I mean, you hear what he's saying? Think about what he said. Get a copy of his remarks and read them, because they're really important. And I always wonder, what happened to some of these people, Bret? What has happened to us that we're so afraid to be independent? It's astounding to me, and I talk to my friends about it, and we just shake our heads. It's amazing.
Let me ask you a few questions about that, because you joined the Congress in 1983.
I was elected in 82, at 30 years of age.
So at the height of the Reagan Revolution. Spend a couple minutes describing the difference between the Reagan Revolution you joined in 83 and the Trump Revolution of 2017, 2018.
Well, I was elected in 1982. I was the only Republican in the country. Terry Casey's here, remembers it vividly, to beat an incumbent Democrat. And I ran on the Reagan program. You might remember in 1982, things were still very bad. I mean, the interest rates were sky high, economic growth was terrible. But I really believed that cutting taxes, cutting spending, reducing regulation would work. And what I really liked about Reagan was his heart. I met Reagan in 1976. I stumbled into the Republican convention. Most people don't know this. I went out there to help a state senator I was working for, and the next thing I knew, somebody didn't show up, and they asked me if I would be in charge of 6 states for Ronald Reagan at the convention. I had no clue what it meant, but I said, well, of course I could. I could do that. And I ended up taking Reagan from delegation to delegation. Not that often, because my states were places like South Dakota, you know, where there weren't that many votes and all that. But I got to know him there, and then I've always believed in what he was about. He had a certain softness and yet a toughness at the same time, right? A good heart, a tough mind. And it was exciting to be there during Reagan. But what was more exciting than Reagan for me was what happened in 1994, when Republicans won the Congress. And the reason why it was so amazing is because that class that came in 1994, started to work with them in 1995, they could care less about politics. They were there to achieve things, and you might remember this: balance the budget, reform welfare, deregulate large parts of our country. And they just didn't give a hoot about politics. So in 95 and in 96 and in 97, it was about things we believed in. And we achieved a lot. I mean, remember, we balanced the budget. We ran surpluses. We paid down the largest amount of the publicly held debt in modern time, maybe in history. But then it got to be about 99 and 2000 where I started to see it weaken. And it started with a highway bill, which is all about pork. And I began to see the discipline fade. Think about where we were, though, at the turn of the century. We had surpluses. We actually reduced spending in discretionary. You know, it was amazing. But then we started to see it weaken. But those years, 95, 96, 97, it was amazing. More exciting to me than what I saw in the Reagan years, except for 1989, when we all saw that wall come down.
But you were also working with the Democratic president.
Yeah, but there were people in that administration who shared our values. You can reach an agreement with people who are predisposed to seek the same sort of goal, and it's just a detail of how you get there. Mm-hmm. But yeah, Pete Domenici and I negotiated in secret for about 6 months to try to get it done, and there were some really great people in that administration, and that's how we got it done.
But bring us forward to today. Do you recognize the Republican Party of that era in today's Republican Party?
Well, of course not. You laid it out beautifully. I mean, it's all these things. It's just. It's
I
like,
gave a speech. You're making news right now.
Yeah. No, they're not making news. Look, I mean, as you all recall, maybe you don't remember, but I ran for president. I didn't win, but I was the last man standing, and I did carry Manhattan, which is why I still like to go there. And
but that was with my vote alone.
yeah. Yeah. So I love this guy. So anyway, so I wouldn't go to the convention. Because how can I go to a convention where somebody is there that would you go to a party if the person invited you to a party you didn't care for and you couldn't offer your support to? So I didn't go to the convention. People went nuts, and they thought, oh, well, he's bitter. It had nothing to do with it. I had a great time running for president. And then I wouldn't endorse him either. Why? Well, I have my paperbacks coming out to pass. It's great. Buy it this fall. 2 kids going to college. But anyway, Bret, I mean, name-calling, division, that doesn't work for our country, doesn't work for the world. And I've always said if we could end that polarization and then seek some common ground, I'd be excited. And we haven't seen that happen. And that's why, I mean, why, just because I'm a Republican, by the way, the Republican Party is my vehicle and not my master. I don't check in at the Republican headquarters to find out what I'm supposed to do. I've been shocked at some of the people that I've known for a long time who are highly educated, highly successful, who continue to look the other way at some of the things that are happening in our country today. I'm stunned. And if I have one more Democrat walk up to me and say, I love you, but I'm a Democrat, I don't know what I'm going to do.
Well, look, let me put the argument to you that I hear all the time from friends of mine who are reluctant supporters of the president. They'll say, you know what, at the end of the day, I don't care about his character, I don't care about the women, the allegations. What I care about is we've got unemployment running below 4%. I'm getting conservative justices and judges on appellate courts, and we're getting more spending for defense. So yeah, there's aspects I don't like, but I can put all of that aside. I can put the whole character issue aside because he's delivering on his promises.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Bret, I don't look at the character issue concerns me, but I don't know anybody who isn't failing in a hypocrite or whatever. I'm the lead one, so I don't like to get into the personal stuff. But let's just talk about the accomplishments. So I got a tax cut. I'm not sure I got a tax cut, but I got a tax cut. You know how it was paid for?
I didn't.
With debt on my children. Okay, in 1986, I was there when they actually negotiated a tax cut, tax reform. Why didn't they do that? Well, because in the process of doing tax reform, you make people angry. But in the process of tax cuts, just give away the money. It's no different than Democrats spending, except it involves taxes. I'd rather have lower taxes than more spending. But the fact of the matter is that tax cut was not a tax reform by any stretch. And so we've driven up the debt. And we will pay the price for this debt. Our children will pay the price for this. What's the other thing we're talking about? Let's talk about, what else did you bring up? Oh, the deregulation. That's been a good thing. I think the Obama administration didn't understand business, and they didn't understand regulation too much of the time. So I think that releasing some of that regulation. Now, I'm not in favor of all this releasing this environmental regulation. I like my national parks. So I'm not for deregulation, but I'm for less regulation, just like we've done in the state. With guardrails. So that's been good, and that's given energy. What was the other thing you said that he did?
Supreme Court picks?
Yeah, well, okay, the court is, after so many years of being controlled by the liberals, is going to have a span now. It's going to be controlled by the conservatives. That's a good thing. So everything that he's doing is not bad. I mean, he does some good things, and some things I praise. But when I look at families being separated at the border, that's not my country. I mean, are you kidding me? DACA. We got any DACA people in here? Maybe you don't want to raise your hand, okay? You came here as children. Your parents brought you. You're a part of our society, and now we want to ship you out, and we want to shut down immigration, and we want to have a trade war with our friends who fight with us today in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and we want to say that we're going to use a national security claim against them to impose tariffs. And we're going to spend our time criticizing, even in personal ways, the leaders of the allies. And look, I'm going to National Press Club. Do I tell you what I'm going to tell them? My Uncle George, my Uncle George was in the infantry. My father was in Europe during the war. My Uncle Steve fought at Iwo Jima to preserve values that you talked about. The idealism, the height of the human condition, guided by the Lord and our ability to have freedom to maximize the gifts we've been given. And now we're fighting with everybody around the world, and we created an organization, NATO, the EU, and here's what we did. After the war, we created the Marshall Plan. We rebuilt Europe. We helped the Japanese. We've kept the peace for 70 years. What do we not like about that? What are we going to put in its place if we don't like this? Did you see what Hungary did? Did you notice that today? Hungary is now doing the deeds of Russia and trying to object to Ukraine being part of the discussions around NATO. Hungary is now doing the deal for Putin. Are you kidding me? Look, I'm emotional about this because I'm worried about your children and grandchildren. These things inevitably, when there is a fraying of this, inevitably leads to conflict. And maybe it can be economic conflict, but there's other kinds of conflict that I've witnessed in my life. And I don't want any more American treasure or treasure from anybody in our alliance to be spent on a battlefield. I'm worried about this. This is real stuff. And so that's why I'm going tomorrow. So if you see me on TV and somebody wants to gripe, tough.
Let me ask you about Governor, let me ask you.
Am I making bad news here, Bruce? I'm not making any news. I don't care.
About one war. Walk a New York Times columnist through what a trade war with Mexico, Canada, the EU means for the people of Ohio.
Well, we pay more for our products, and we will, if it lasts over time. Maybe it won't last forever. I mean, I was on CNBC the other day, and they were saying, well, this is not going to go on for long. I don't know. But over time, what happens with tariffs is we pay more for our products, and we get products that are not as good because there's no competition. And at the same time, we're fraying our relationship with them, which we need because, you know, everything's a two-way street. As I like to say, if somebody is rich and powerful and famous or whatever, and they just hold other people down or lord it over them, think about human nature. How do we feel when that's happening to us? Then the time comes when they come to us when they get in trouble, because inevitably they do, and say, oh, now I need your help. Now, if you happen to be a person of faith, I guess you put everything aside and you help them. But that's not necessarily guaranteed in human nature. So it's a bunch of different problems here. And then to tell the Canadians that we are slapping on national security reasons for these tariffs. Now, if we have a trade dispute, then resolve it. Sit down, negotiate, and resolve it. But don't use some loophole or some phony excuse to impose these tariffs, which I think are a mistake. In terms of China, I think China's been ripping us off and the world off for a long time on intellectual property. So we've slapped tariffs on them. I think that's not the right way to go, but in absence of anything else, I don't know what these other presidents were doing, maybe slapping some tariffs on is a way to start, but the ultimate answer is to work through our allies to tell the Chinese and to target Chinese industries that makes it very painful for China to continue to steal our property. So now we're going to go ask our allies, all of them, to get together with us and then work with us on that while we're kicking the living daylights out of them on the other end. How do you think that's going to work? That's the problem that we're running into here.
All of this sounds, I think, convincing to me. I'm sure it's convincing to many people in this room. 2 years ago, all the arguments you're making and some of the other people on the Republican national stage were making were swept right off the field. So spend a little time giving us an analysis of why the mainstream Republican Party was put to one side and Trump was able to dominate that field the way he did.
Well, I think, Bret, we live in, it's like we go to Ohio State football games, and they could lose every game, and we'd still put 110,000 people in the stadium, and it wouldn't matter what was happening. We'd be cheering for them, right? I mean, that's the way it is. That's what our political parties have become. We're like we're rooting for a football team, right? For a university. We wear red and they wear blue, and all we wanted to do was win, 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 win. And I guess I don't agree with Lombardi. I don't think it just matters if you win. I think it matters how you play the game. And what happened here? In my opinion, Americans kind of felt like the system's not working. Do you ever play checkers or chess or Risk or anything? You play chess, you're probably pretty good. But if I were playing chess against you and you kept beating me and you got me frustrated, I probably would knock the whole board over. Okay? That's what we did in the country. We don't want anybody with any experience. We don't want any politicians. Just throw the whole thing out and let's see what we can get. Plus, of course, Trump is a celebrity, and people love celebrities. I mean, we love them. I mean, we pay so much attention to them. So I think people felt ignored, sometimes desperate, got tired of politicians, and decided to start all over again. And then the Republicans, I tell you what their problem is, and the Democrats are the same way, by the way. In case you're a Democrat here, you think you're great. You don't know what you're doing because you can't even tell me what you're for, okay? But you have to pass the litmus test from Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders in order to be acceptable. If you're a Republican and if you start to do things that aggravate the base, quote, whatever this base is, then you lose a primary. And then what you say is, well, if I can just get through the primary, don't worry, I'll be back to normal. And then you say, okay, well, how's it going now? Oh, well, I got to win a general, but when I get there, I'll be better. Trust me, okay? I'm done with that. I'm not trusting without verifying. I'm sorry. And so the party has just become, I'm amazed at it. Look, I got a legislature over here. They override my vetoes. Do I like that? No. Do I care that much? No. But here's the fact. Here's the fact. At least they're active. At least they're willing to stand up. Where are the people in my party? Where have any of the politicians been on this issue of family separation at the border? Who did we hear from? I haven't heard anything from Joe Biden. Did you? I mean, how many people have really spoken out? Now it's starting to go. Now it's safe to do it. Where were they in the beginning? Folks, I have to tell you what I think the most serious problem is. And Bret, I think you share this. We are forgetting that we're all made in the image of God. Now, if humanists are here, I love you, and this is no disrespect. But when we begin to lose the sense that we are going at some point to account to a higher power for what we were given, and that selfishness is not counting for the good, and that we need to live a life a little bigger than ourselves, that's what we're losing. And it's what some of the world is losing. I'm going on here with you, but look, I make your job easier. Think about migration. What are we supposed to do? You got people, or immigration, you got people living in Guatemala. Put yourself in Guatemala. You're a mom and you're living in Guatemala, and they're threatening to rape your daughter if you don't do a drug deal for them, or they'll kill you. What do? You know what I do? I get the hell out of there. And then I hear people say when they get to the border, well, they brought this on themselves. Is that our country? That is not the country that I grew up, and the country that I believe must be preserved, and the country that I love, and our country will be preserved. But don't wait for somebody else. What the hell are you doing about this? What are you doing in your job, and what are you doing in your life, and what are you doing for somebody else? Stick your nose into somebody else's business. You matter, you're important, and we lose that and leave it to somebody else. You're the spark that creates the revolution to bring us back to where we want to be in this country.
So I think one of the questions that will be on everyone's mind after that beautiful soliloquy is, I mean that in the best sense, well, what are you going to be doing in the next 2.5 years or so?
I don't know. I am trying as best as I can to keep a political organization together so that I can have a voice. I meet with many people. I was telling you about James Davison Hunter, who's coming in here to talk about the issue of change. Now, there's two ways to think about this. First of all, if I don't run for public office, can I, in the course of everything else I'm doing, keep a voice and help other people to find their voices? I don't know. I mean, I'm going to try my best. I've got friends who are trying to help me to do that. Some people say, well, if you don't run for president, I'm not interested anymore in helping you. If that's the case, then I'll just do my thing as best I can and continue as best I can to do television or write books or whatever, speak, whatever, I don't know. But I don't know what's in my future. Here's what I do know about the current political situation. In the old days, you could do a tape. You do an interview, they put you on tape, and then they show it at night. Now they can't do that because 5 minutes from now, it's outdated. So we don't know what's going to happen. So I practice in politics the old philosophy you do in basketball. Just hang around the hoop and see if the ball bounces off. Because if you're sitting on the bench, you aren't going to get a rebound. But if you're in the game, you can.
And will that be a game within the Republican Party or some other vehicle? I'd
like to think so, but I don't know. I don't know if my party can come out of this stupor. And think about this for a second. I have a lot of people, not a lot, but some people over in my legislature, they're angry at me, okay? Now, today I just announced that we went from 89 cents in our piggy bank, in our surplus, to $2.7 billion. In 7 years. I want you to think about that, okay? We went from a loss of 350,000 jobs to a gain now of 520,000. And that's great. But here's what's really great. The developmentally disabled, the mentally ill, the working poor, the drug addicted, the minority community. Look at the numbers. People don't know all these statistics, but they intuitively feel like things are headed in the right direction. That, to me, Bret, is the philosophy and the roadmap for all parties to follow. I don't know where this is going to go. I just don't know. And we'll see.
Give some advice, because there may be one or two Democrats in this room. Give some advice to the Democratic Party about its roadmap for the next 2.5 years to achieve the kinds of things you're talking about.
Well, I talked to a I don't get too specific, but I talked to a Democrat governor the other day, and I said, "What are you doing?" They're talking about the Democrats are talking about abolishing ICE. Now, look, I got my problems with the way we're handling immigration, but what are we supposed to do? Have open borders? Are you people crazy? We're going to go and have Medicare for everybody. We can't even fund Medicare. What are we going to head into a system that is social, that doesn't bring about the innovation that the private healthcare markets do? What is it you want to do, by the way? All I hear you do is bash Trump, but I've never seen a single exciting idea out of you. So I said to this governor, I said, you need to be out there and you need to be talking about the things that have made you successful in your state. And that will be at odds at the drift of the Democratic Party. So if you're a Republican, you have to kowtow to Trump, right, Terry? And if you're a Democrat, you got to kowtow to Bernie Sanders or they'll kill you in a primary. You know what? Maybe it's easy for me now, but I've always been a troublemaker. Right, Terry? Yes. Yeah. You know what? The worst thing to do is to win an election by selling out your soul. You know, stand for something. Common sense, the Democrats lost my father. He's a mailman. How could you lose blue-collar people? Have a program and make it positive and make it common sense and more centrist. We are a middle to right country. Forget, you're not going to win on the left, and you're not going to win with vitriol and anger. Don't you think, let me ask you, Bret, don't you think that this progressive business and the yelling and the hating of Trump is counterproductive to their success?
Yeah, I mean, I used to, the joke about the Republican Party is it used to be known as the stupid party, but I think that's also switched. You know, people tell me, oh, I'm a member of the resistance. And I say, really, have you stopped paying taxes? No. Have you taken to the hills with a gun? No. What are you doing? I'm drinking a latte with soy milk in Park Slope, being a member of the resistance. You're not a member of the resistance, you're a member of the posers. Be an opposition party. What this country needs, and I'm saying this as a guy on the right who opposes Trump, is a proper opposition party speaking to the vital center of American politics, which is not Burlington, Vermont, and Berkeley, California. It's Dayton and Denver. That's the vital center of this country, and that's what I think Democrats, intelligent Democrats, ought to be doing. But you're absolutely right. There is an echo chamber in which the only voices they hear are the voices on the far left, which are never going to win elections outside of the 14th district of New York City, of Queens, or places in Vermont, and convincing themselves it's a national agenda. You used to have a party up until the 1990s. When you think about it, Bill Clinton he had a kind of a working class affect, he had middle class politics, and he had very upper class tastes and aspirations. But that was a successful Democratic presidency, minus the grossness.
Right.
And Democrats have repudiated the last truly successful model of successful democratic governance. How do you get back to that vital center, which Arthur Schlesinger used to talk about, where the differences are between people like Harry Truman and Dwight Eisenhower, JFK and Ronald Reagan, not Eugene Debs and Lyndon LaRouche and Pat Buchanan?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Speaking of Denver, you think about what's happened in Denver with John Hickenlooper, the governor. They've been voted one of the most successful states in the country in terms of economic growth. They've been able to deal with the environmental issues appropriately. Oh, by the way, with the issues of gun violence. And by the way, before I got to say this. We have a proposal put together by people who are Second Amendment advocates that says that if you know somebody in your family or somebody you see at work who's in an emotional state that poses a danger to themselves, to their family, or to people that they work with, you get a chance to go to a court, get an order when you can prove that, and have their gun taken. I cannot pass that through this legislature.
We're going to go to some questions. So I think there are mics. Is that right, Jane? There are mics set up there. And I'm going to be a fascist about it. Give yourself a sentence or two. We don't need a preamble. And questions end with a question mark.
That's it, right? Yeah.
So who's first?
Hello, I am Bill Lafayette. My question is around an issue that I think is relevant to workforce, and that is GLBT rights and protections. As we're fighting against states that have these protections, I guess just talk about how you see that fitting in our ability to compete.
Well, we don't want to favor discrimination against anybody. I mean, plain and simple. We're in favor of people having rights and the right to do what they want, as long as, and I think Bret said it best, as long as it doesn't infringe on somebody else. That's what America hallmark is, of freedom. You get to do what you want to do as long as it doesn't get in the way of somebody else, with certain exceptions to that. But discrimination, we're not viewed in this state as a place where you're not, they're not welcome, or businesses are running away because there's some discrimination here. We're not viewed that way.
Governor Margie Pizzuti, Goodwill, Columbus. It's good to see you again and your ever spunkiness. I wanted to ask a question about a challenge we face in our community and even in the state of Ohio, this tale of two cities in Columbus, where we're thriving, low unemployment, you know, all of the statistics, yet our poverty rate is ever growing. And how do we as a community and as a state, and there are other states around the country, how do we get our arms around co-creating a community where everybody has the opportunity to thrive?
Well, look, I think that people do have the opportunity in Columbus. What holds us back, I guess, from time to time is an education system that isn't working. Doesn't work enough, I should say. See, I've actually gotten to be a little bit more measured. Our education system is built on a model when people spent a large part of their time out in the fields farming. The education system it's like the Pentagon. It's the hardest thing to change. How do you run education? Well, you get kids out of the classroom and you teach them the way they have to. Well, look at Abigail Wexner's school. Go out there, visit it, see what she does to bring the reality of the world in combination with education. And we don't do enough of that. We have tried. The Columbus Partnership is trying to do that. You want to get kids out of this rote environment and move them into an environment where they can begin to have their eyes opened and begin to dream. So in that regard, and workforce is our biggest challenge outside of the, I think, the collapse, or I shouldn't say collapse, but the erosion of virtue. Look, I wanted to put a non-elected business person on every school board in the state. Why? Because I wanted a business person to be able to tell the school board, you're missing it. What are you doing to change your curriculum? What are you doing to have education that's relevant, that gives kids values and resilience? Couldn't pass it. I also said that every teacher, for at least a week, ought to, as part of their renewal of their contract, spend time out at the Huntington, or spend time out at the law firm, or spend time out at Ohio State. And not so much Ohio State, but in businesses, okay, where they can learn the operation. Couldn't pass it. Because the forces of education work always against change. And the same is true at our universities. They're not a change advocate. They fight change all the time. And so if you really want to figure out how to open a world for people, you have to dramatically change the education system. And I don't think it's really going to change except for this. There will be a change that will disintermediate education. More and more people will be learning through programs that are sponsored by businesses, because you don't have to go to school for 4 years and ring up a $60,000, $70,000 a year issue. So education reform, it's either going to come or it's going to be disintermediated in my view. But the key to money, the key to escaping poverty is education. And I think that we have been willing to let political correctness and politics get in the way of the kind of reform that we really need.
And the final question.
Thank you, Governor. I'm Bob Gervaisi from Ohio Dominican University. We are passionate change agents. We thank you for speaking at our commencement a couple of years ago, and when I started as president, the prioress of the Dominican Sisters gave me a copy of your book, and I'm happy to say I read it. I did want to say I agree with you wholeheartedly about the need for universities to change, and independent universities like Ohio Dominican, Otterbein, Capital have really led the way. Do you believe that government should recognize the contributions of independent higher education and not disadvantage them vis-a-vis state institutions?
Well, what are you looking for, money?
If I can clarify,
I don't know what you're looking for.
If I can clarify, state institutions get direct subsidies.
Yeah, well, we're not going to be expanding the answer to that is no, we're not going to.
Should we be subsidizing students rather than institutions?
Yeah. Look, the private schools are great. By the way, the most transforming higher education of the community colleges, take a look at Columbus State. I mean, that guy's doing, is he here? He's doing a great job, David Harrison. Well, he's not doing as great as I thought, now that he's not here. But look, we don't want to see the disappearance. But, you know, my suggestion to you is Figure out a way to change the university so it doesn't cost a darn much. Figure out a way to deliver online courses that people can take at a fraction of the cost and combine it with the real experience. Look, the problem with online education right now is you're missing the college experience. My daughter, I just talked to her last night, she's going to Clemson. And, you know, offer something, and she's just thrilled to be down there at Clemson right now. Offer them something that will reduce the cost while at the same time providing a real college experience, which is what she's excited about also. And it's coming. The changes are coming. Am I right, Mark? They're coming. As Sebastian Throne is developing these programs for businesses, by the way, Sebastian wanted to start with universities to try to figure out how to do more online activities. I told him, I said, you're wasting your time, Sebastian. It'll take you 100 years to get that done. So he gave it up, and now he works with businesses. I told the universities in this state that we could work with Grand Canyon, or not with Grand Canyon, Western Governors University. Are you part of Western Governors? I'm the new chancellor. Okay. The Western Governor University, it's a different kind of university, isn't it? Tell them what it does. Stand up and tell them what you do. We need a woman to be up here speaking. Go ahead.
So the biggest difference between what Western Governors does and what traditional universities do is that it is online, but it's competency-based. So time is not the measure. It is what knowledge and skills you gain and can demonstrate. And it is also very much adaptive to individual support. So students have a course instructor, they also have a mentor, and importantly, they are evaluated by a separate person from the course instructor. And so it's not the same person that's teaching you that's evaluating the skills and knowledge that you've gained. And our data show that people are moving to and through their programs much more quickly when time is not the measure, but in fact what you can learn and gain. And of course they merge with much less debt. Great competencies and advanced careers that are online.
I mean, why would you like that? Now, I asked the universities in Ohio if they would sign up with Western Governors, and I said, I'll give you a year, right, Scott? I'll give you a year, sign up. They didn't, so we're just going ahead anyway. What I'm suggesting to you is there's a way to deliver quality at lower prices and still be exciting. No one has quite figured all that out yet, but they will, and it's going to change higher education, K through 12, and early childhood, which is really critical. I mean, we should do this every week so I can talk, Bret. I mean,
Governor, thank you.
Thank you. One last thing, because I heard this, Alex said this the other day. We're at the Transportation Research Center. One of the reasons why I love Jeff Bezos, he's the richest man in the world now, he runs Amazon, is that he actually rewards people in his operation who fail at creative ideas. I mean, he doesn't want failure, but he's not afraid of failure. The Wright brothers, if you study their history, they didn't quit after they failed. They had a lot of trouble, first down there on the sand dunes, but more important, where the development was done, right in Dayton. A lot of failure, accidents, tough. Our problem with the leadership is sometimes they may have the vision, you have to develop the vision, but don't be afraid to carry out the vision. That relates to everything. And if you look at businesses that have visionary leaders, education establishments with visionary leaders, political leaders with visions and ability to carry it out, that's how you change the world. Not by the same old crap that we've been doing. That's called insanity, okay? Doing the same thing over and over, expecting a better result. Vision, courage, strength, a good team, change the world. Thanks, Bret.